Hello everyone, this is Andre Tonelli and I'm happy to announce a new series of videos called One Chord a Week. And as you might have gathered by the name, it is exactly that. I will show you one chord every week. And these videos will be kind of short and straight to the point, and maybe there will be a bit of a contrast to our Saturday live streams where I go live every Saturday 6:30 p.m. Central European Time. If you don't know about it, you should join us. It's a great bunch of people and I teach for about an hour or so because the topics are pretty deep. We go through songwriting, performance, chords, scales. We talk about music theory. We talk about music production, all kinds of stuff that is related to being a musician and a performer. But these videos tend to be pretty long and they tend to be pretty involved. So I understand that during 1 week, you might not be able to go through the whole thing. So, that's no problem. They're always there available on the channel. And the playlist is Music Talk Live. So if you want to go through them, I'm sure you'll find very useful things. But I also wanted to provide you with things that are a bit easier to digest and easier to work on week by week. And so I think chords are very often overlooked by musicians, especially when guitarists, they start out playing, they get involved with technique, of course. Maybe they play in a band and they have to go through the songs and learn the songs, and then they have to maybe learn how to improvise a little bit, so they go to the scales, and that's all great, but chords really are incredibly useful. Chords give variety and depth and emotional depth to your songs and compositions. They also open your ears way more than scales because all the notes are there at the same time. They provide such huge advantages when you really get into them, and I thought it would be something that would be useful, and that's the whole point of basically all my videos. I try to be useful and as useful as possible to those who are learning the guitar. All the videos will have the same structure and be divided into 4 parts. The first one will be just a little bit of theory and the formula of the chord, so we understand how the notes of the chords relate to each other, and then eventually you'll be able to transpose them and use them in different keys without having to memorize everything, because you'll understand the actual DNA of the chord. Then I'll move on to the sound of the chord, which is extremely important, of course, and we'll talk a little bit about the relationship between the formula or the notes that are used in the chord with the sound. We'll compare the chord to other similar chords and maybe talk a little bit about how and why and when and where you will want to use them. And of course, I will always encourage you to make up your own mind as to the color and the emotional content of each chord. And then we'll move on to section 3, which will be me showing you 3 fingerings for the chord. I will try to spread them out throughout the fretboard so that eventually when you use them, you'll always have one of them in whatever key you're in. You'll always have one available basically wherever you're playing in that moment. All right, we don't want to have to jump through the whole fretboard just to play one chord. So I'm going to give you 3 fingerings, and then finally I will tell you at least a few examples, maybe 1 or 2 or 3, of what scales you could use over that chord. Of course, I can't show you all the scales because there's so many of them around the world, but I think in combination with the formula and the sound and the positions and all that, you will eventually be able to go out there and, as always, expand your horizons, which really is the purpose of this video. So without further ado, let's get started with the first chord. And for today's video, I picked one of my very favorite chords. It's a very simple one too. It's called the C major 7th chord. And the reason I call it C major 7th is because everything in this series of videos will be given to you in the key of C. But of course, you are free and actually required to move it and transpose it to all different keys. All right, but the major 7th chord is a very useful chord because it's not as intrusive as other complex chords, but at the same time is very charged emotionally. So before we begin, let's get started with the formula of the chord. As you might have guessed by the name of the C major 7th chord, the basis of it is a major triad, which means we have a root, in this case is C, we have a major 3rd, which is E, and we have a G, which is the 5th. This is just a regular major chord. But on top of these 3 notes, we're going to add one more note, which is the major 7th. Now, the major 7th is an extremely simple note to find because you will find it right before the root. So if my root is C, 1/2 step or 1 fret right before the root, I will find my major 7th. So if my root is C, my major 7th is B, All I have to do is add it to my chord. So I will have my root, my major third, my perfect fifth, and then my major seventh B. And you can hear the sound transform from a triad to that major seventh. All right, so let's talk about the sound. I've always loved the sound of major seventh chords, and I find them extremely useful. And I'm going to give you my opinion on it, on the sound, but of course you shouldn't take my opinion as your opinion, and I will just give it to you so that you get an idea of how my mind works around sound, and maybe it will inspire you to go out and find your own feel and emotional attachment to every single chord that you play. For me, major seventh is a chord that is not quite as major as a major chord, right? Or not as happy as a major chord. Whereas a C major chord is really specific. You know, it's a beautiful sounding chord, but it certainly is major, right? It's certainly happy and bright and positive. But the major seventh chord adds a little bit of uncertainty. You hear that? It doesn't make it sad necessarily, but to me, it adds a little bit of melancholy, and it adds a little bit of uncertainty, and it adds a little bit of ambiguity to the thing. So certainly if I play a major chord, everything seems to be good right now, and I'm thinking of tomorrow, and tomorrow seems pretty bright as well. But when I play a major seventh chord, maybe I'm a bit worried about tomorrow. Is tomorrow gonna be good, or maybe I'm just thinking of yesterday? You know, and feel that maybe things haven't progressed quite as I thought they would, or maybe just not sure what I'm thinking, right? Also, it makes it richer in harmony. Of course, we have one more note, but feel the difference between a major triad and the major seventh. It's like certainly more information, which means more sound for your brain to process. And to me, this gives me access to a lot of different opportunities, because if I have a song that starts with a C major chord, which of course there's nothing wrong with it, but you know, it will be pretty hard to get away from it, you know. So if I ever want to establish something different, it will take me a lot of work, or some drastic measures like moving to the same chord but minor. You know, I've done that in a few songs, and it works, but it's certainly something a bit drastic. Whereas this chord, when I start with it, it keeps things open, right? It keeps all my options available, and I can then move towards a bit more somber feels, and then maybe move towards the happier places. You know, it's just a very versatile chord. So this is what I feel about it. You know, I look forward to seeing in your comments maybe what it is you feel the major seventh chord provides emotionally for you. And now let me give you 3 positions of this chord on the fretboard. Before we begin, let me repeat that there are so many positions, especially for a chord like this. I probably know like 40 of them. And I'm not saying it to show off, I'm saying it because you have to understand that if something connects with you emotionally as a chord, you will want to have control over it in many different places, many different voicings, many different sets of strings, because each one will have a slightly different sound and will be more useful or less in a song or another. All right, so certainly use these 3 as a starting point, but if you connect with a chord, do go out and find more information, or find your own positions, which is usually the best way of learning them. All right, but let me give you 3 to get started. This one is extremely useful, is in the inner string. So we leave the 6th and the 1st string out, and we play 3, 5, 4, 5. You can play with the pick or with your fingers. Okay, very beautiful sounding chord. And the next one starts on the 6th string, and it's on the 6th string I play the 8th fret, which is C, and then you have to skip the 5th string. If you play with your fingers, that's fine, you just don't play. But if you play with the pick, make sure that you're muting the 5th string with your 1st finger. And the position is 8, skip the 5th string, 9, 9, 8. Right? With the pick, mute the 5th string. All right, and finally, Here's one that uses the top strings. This is extremely useful if you want something lighter, or if you want to play on a different register, or maybe mix it up with some melody, right? Because maybe you're improvising in the higher registers and you need a chord that's not all the way down there. So this is really useful. And it's on the top 4 strings, so 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st. And we play 10, 12, 12, 12. Again, you can play with the pick or with the fingers for a slightly more subtle sound. You can arpeggiate it. You can do all kinds of stuff, right? See, these are my not my 3 favorite positions, but certainly the ones that I think are extremely useful to get started with. And finally, let's look at what scales we can use over this chord. The first one certainly is the major scale, the regular major scale. And the way we find out if a scale fits over a chord is extremely simple. I gave you the formula in the beginning. All you have to do is make sure that the scale you want to use includes the notes of the formula. So in this case, our formula was root, major 3rd, perfect 5th, major 7th. Any scale that has these 4 notes will work. And there's a lot of them, but I'm going to give you 2. One of them, again, is the major scale. It will sound very cool because the chord is quite complex and the major scale is very simple. You get this more sophisticated sound. And the other one that I enjoy over this chord is the Lydian scale. And the Lydian scale is a major scale with a raised 4th. In the case of C, the F becomes an F sharp. The reason I can use it is that my chord does not have an F. So it doesn't matter what I do in the other notes, the chord is not affected. I can still respect and maintain the 4 notes of the chord. It's a great sounding scale over this chord. Makes it sound a bit brighter and a bit more exotic in a way. But these are my 2 suggestions just to get you started. Then of course go out there and find all possible scales. All right, so this was the first episode of this new series. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it interesting and useful. And if you did, please consider subscribing, commenting, liking, and all the good stuff. Is really extremely important for the channel because it will help me reach more people. And after all, that's why I'm doing it, providing information to those maybe who can't afford it, or maybe they live in a place where it's just not available to them for one reason or another. All right, so if you could do that, it would be very much appreciated. And I look forward to seeing you again next week for a new chord. And by all means, feel invited to our Saturday Hangouts on YouTube. And you'll learn some cool stuff that I can promise. All right, see you very soon. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.